60 feet down, everything is fine. That's the lie. You've just spent 40 glorious minutes on a reef, somewhere warm, watching a sea turtle look at you like you owe it money, and now you're heading up because your air's running low and lunch is calling. You feel great. You feel, in fact, better than great. And so you rise, not fast exactly, just normal. You break the surface, you spit out your regulator, you pull yourself up the ladder. And about 15 minutes later, sitting on the deck in the sun with a granola bar in your hand, your left shoulder starts to ache. You roll it, you stretch it. Slept on it wrong, you figure. Then the ache becomes a deep, gnawing, grinding pain that doesn't respond to anything, and it starts to spread. And somewhere in the back of your skull, a very old alarm begins to ring. Because what's happening right now is not a pulled muscle. What's happening right now is that your own blood is turning into foam, and you did nothing wrong. You followed the rules. It's already begun. Hollywood has told you the story, and Hollywood, as usual, got it backwards. In the movies, the diver who comes up too fast clutches their chest, their eyes bulge, and they die in about 8 dramatic seconds, usually while gasping something meaningful. The truth is so much slower and so much stranger. The Benz doesn't announce itself. It waits. It lets you smile and towel off and start planning dinner. The real horror of decompression sickness is that by the time your body tells you something is wrong, the thing that's wrong has already been building for 20 minutes, quietly, in the dark, inside your joints, in your spine, in your lungs. There's a way to reverse this completely. I'll get to it. The catch is that most people wait too long to use it. To understand why your blood is fizzing, you have to understand what happened on the way down. The air you breathe is about 78% nitrogen, a gas your body does absolutely nothing with. You inhale it, you exhale it, it's just along for the ride. At the surface, under normal pressure, a small amount of that nitrogen stays dissolved in your blood and tissues, invisible and harmless, the same way carbon dioxide stays dissolved and invisible inside a sealed can of soda. Nobody thinks about it. It's just there. But water is heavy. For every 33 feet you descend, the pressure on your body doubles, then keeps climbing. And there's a rule of physics called Henry's Law, which sounds boring and is actually the entire reason you're in trouble. Henry's Law says that the more pressure you put on a gas sitting above a liquid, the more of that gas gets forced into the liquid. Down at 60 feet, breathing compressed air, you are pushing nitrogen into your blood and tissues far faster and far harder than you ever could on land. Every minute you spend down there, more nitrogen dissolves into you, into your muscles, your joints, your fat, your spinal cord. Your tissues are soaking it up like a sponge held under a faucet. And you feel absolutely nothing because dissolved gas is silent. It has no volume. It's just quietly saturating you, molecule by molecule, the whole time you're admiring that turtle. This is fine, as long as it stays dissolved. The problem is the trip back up. When you ascend, the pressure drops, and all that nitrogen you crammed into your tissues under high pressure suddenly has nowhere to be. It wants to come out of solution. If you rise slowly, and this is the entire point of the safety stops divers make, hanging at 15 feet for a few minutes like they're waiting for a bus, the nitrogen leaves your tissues gently, drifts back into your bloodstream, travels to your lungs, and you simply breathe it out, slow and controlled. But if you rise too fast, or if you stayed down too long and soaked up too much, the pressure drops faster than your body can vent the gas. And that dissolved nitrogen does exactly what the soda does the instant you crack the can. It fizzes. That's not a metaphor. That is the mechanism. Bubbles of nitrogen gas begin forming directly inside your blood and inside your tissues in real time, while you stand there on the boat feeling fine. A dissolved gas is harmless, but a bubble is a physical object, and a physical object inside your circulatory system is a catastrophe with a delay on it. The first place you'll usually feel it is your joints, and this is where the disease gets its name. Nitrogen loves fatty tissue, and the tissues around your large joints, your shoulders, your elbows, your knees, your hips, are rich in exactly the kind of material nitrogen accumulated in. So that's where the bubbles form first and grow biggest. As they expand, they press on the tissues and nerve endings packed around the joint, and they set off inflammation, which is your immune system's blunt, all-purpose response to something being physically wrong. The result is a deep, boring, relentless pain that makes people hunch and bend to try to relieve it. That's the actual origin of the word. Back in the 1870s, the men who built America's great bridges had to dig the foundations from inside sealed, pressurized underwater chambers, and when they came up too fast, they got this so consistently and doubled over so visibly that the disease simply got named after the posture. They were bent. It stuck. It's the most literal disease name in medicine. But joint pain is the polite version. The bubbles are not staying in your shoulder. They're in your bloodstream now, in your veins, riding the current back toward your heart and your lungs. And this is where decompression sickness stops being painful and starts being lethal. Under normal circumstances, your lungs are the filter. Venous blood full of tiny gas bubbles arrives, spreads out across the vast net of pulmonary capillaries, vessels so fine that red blood cells pass through them single file, and the gas diffuses out to be exhaled. Your lungs are supposed to catch the bubbles. That's their job. But if enough nitrogen came out of solution all at once, the bubbles arrive faster than the lungs can clear them, and they start plugging those capillaries like sediment clogging a drain. This is the condition old divers call the chokes, and the name is grimly accurate. As the pulmonary blood vessels fill with gas, blood can no longer flow freely through your lungs. You feel it as a tightness behind your breastbone, a burning when you inhale, a dry cough you can't explain, and a breathlessness that gets worse every minute, even though you are sitting perfectly still. Your body is trying to move blood through a set of pipes that are increasingly full of gas instead of liquid. Your chest aches. Each breath returns less than the one before. And your heart, feeling the resistance building in front of it, begins to strain against a wall of bubbles it was never designed to pump against. Meanwhile, in your spinal cord, something quieter and worse is happening. The spinal cord is a favorite target of decompression sickness, and bubbles forming in or around it interrupt the electrical wiring that carries every signal between your brain and your body. This is the moment the symptoms stop being pain and start being loss. A numbness creeps into your feet. A tingling spreads up your legs, the specific pins and needles feeling of a limb that has fallen asleep. Except it isn't waking back up. Your legs feel heavy, then unreliable, then simply gone. People describe trying to stand and finding that the message from their brain arrives at their legs garbled, or not at all. Bladder control slips. The bubbles are physically severing the conversation between your mind and your lower body, and depending on how long they sit there strangling that tissue, the damage can be the kind you do not walk back from. Washington Roebling spent the rest of his life learning exactly how permanent that damage can be. Now the bubbles reach the finish line, and the finish line is your brain. If bubbles cross into your arterial circulation, the fresh oxygenated blood being pumped out to your organs, they travel straight up to the brain and lodge in vessels too small to pass them. This is a gas embolism, which is a fancy way of saying a bubble of air is now blocking blood flow to part of your brain, and the tissue downstream of that blockage is being cut off from oxygen. The effect is functionally a stroke, sudden confusion, slurred speech, vision that dims or splits, a crushing headache, one side of the body going weak. You may not be able to explain what's wrong because the part of your brain that explains things is one of the parts losing its blood supply. And then the system starts eating itself. The surface of every one of these bubbles is a foreign object as far as your blood is concerned, and your blood reacts to foreign objects by clotting and inflaming. So around each bubble, your body starts forming small clots and dumping inflammatory chemicals, which damage the lining of the blood vessels themselves. Damaged vessels leak. Fluid escapes out of your circulation into your tissues, which means the actual volume of blood left inside your vessels drops. Now you have less blood, thicker blood, more clots, and vessels already choked with gas. Your blood pressure falls. Your heart, still fighting that wall of bubbles in the lungs, is now trying to pump insufficient volume through a wrecked and clotting system. This is circulatory collapse. Your organs are no longer receiving the oxygenated blood they need to run. Your brain, starved on two fronts, blocked by bubbles and shorted on pressure, begins to shut down in sequence. Consciousness goes soft at the edges. The breathlessness becomes air hunger, that primal drowning on dry land sensation of a body that cannot get enough oxygen no matter how hard it works. And the heart, overwhelmed by an entire circulatory system that has physically foamed over, loses its rhythm and stops. Death from severe decompression sickness is death by 1,000 bubbles. A body killed not by any wound, but by the sudden appearance of gas where gas was never supposed to be. From a smiling diver on a sunny deck to cardiac arrest can be less than an hour. Which brings us to the man who built the most famous bridge in America from a sickbed. In 1870, Washington Roebling took over construction of the Brooklyn Bridge after his father died. And to sink the bridge's foundations, workers descended into massive sealed chambers called caissons, pressurized boxes on the river bottom, full of compressed air to hold back the water so men could dig. Same physics as diving. High pressure going in, nitrogen soaking into their bodies for hours, and then the ride back up to normal pressure at the end of a shift. Nobody understood decompression yet. Men would climb out, walk a few blocks, and collapse doubled over in the street in agony. They called it, without irony, the Grecian bend, after a fashionable posture of the era, then just the bends. Over 100 workers on that bridge were struck down. At least 14 died. Roebling, who insisted on going into the caissons himself to lead from the front, was brought up one day in 1872, unconscious, and never fully recovered. He was left partially paralyzed, in chronic pain, so sensitive to light and sound he could barely tolerate a conversation. And so the chief engineer of the Brooklyn Bridge directed the rest of its construction for over a decade from a chair by his apartment window, watching through a telescope, while his wife Emily carried his instructions to the site and effectively ran the largest engineering project in the country. The bridge that half of New York crosses without a thought stands on foundations that cost one man his ability to walk to them. Here's the part that borders on the miraculous. Decompression sickness is one of the few catastrophic medical events that can be genuinely, completely reversed if you understand the one principle those Brooklyn Bridge doctors didn't. The bubbles formed because pressure dropped. So you put the pressure back. That's a hyperbaric chamber. It's a sealed steel room that raises the atmospheric pressure around your entire body, back up to the equivalent of being deep underwater. And under that renewed pressure, the physics simply run in reverse. The nitrogen bubbles shrink. They redissolve back into your blood as if they'd never left. And while you're in there, you breathe pure oxygen, which floods your system, feeds the tissues that were being starved, and creates a steep gradient that coaxes the nitrogen out of you gently and safely this time. The pressure gets lowered slowly over hours, the way your ascent should have gone in the first place. It is, essentially, a do-over for your bloodstream. But the chamber only works if you get in it. And here is where people die of a survivable disease. The single most important thing you can do the moment you suspect the bends is admit that it's the bends. That sounds absurdly simple. It is the hardest step. Because the early symptoms are so easy to explain away, it's a sore shoulder, it's a weird tingle, I'm just tired, and because divers are proud and don't want to end the trip or cause a fuss, people sit on a boat, talking themselves out of it for the exact hour their tissue can't spare. If you have been diving and anything feels wrong afterward, joint pain, numbness, breathlessness, confusion, a rash, dizziness, you assume it's decompression sickness until a professional proves it isn't. You get on 100% oxygen immediately, because breathing pure oxygen starts pulling nitrogen out of you even before the chamber. You call the Divers Alert Network, an actual hotline that exists for exactly this, and you go and subscribe.